There are truths that never knock. They don't wait for permission, and they don't ask to be believed. They simply settle into a life the way dust settles onto a windowsill, so slowly that no single day carries the evidence, until one afternoon you run your hand across the surface and realize how much is gathered there without your noticing. I used to think change required a witness, a moment large enough to be remembered, a sentence dramatic enough to be repeated later. I know now that most of what shapes a person happens without an audience. It happens in the pause before a decision, in the breath taken before a door is either opened or left closed. Nobody applauds those moments. Nobody photographs them. They pass by looking exactly like nothing, and that is precisely how they manage to matter so much. For most of my life, I kept people at a careful distance. Not out of coldness, out of respect for accuracy. Closeness has a way of bending the truth toward what someone hopes to find, and I preferred the truth unbent, even when it was plain, even when it offered no comfort. Distance let me see clearly. It let me watch instead of react. And for a long time, watching felt like enough. Silence became my language before words ever did. Not the brittle silence of people who have run out of things to say, but a fuller kind, the sort that holds unfinished thoughts the way a held breath holds air. I learned to read the space between sentences before I learned to trust the sentences themselves. People reveal more in half seconds of hesitation than they do in hours of careful talking. A glance that lands somewhere just past the person it should have been meeting. A pause that lasts one beat too long. These are the places where the real conversation happens, quietly, underneath the one everyone can hear. I never rushed toward conclusions, and the world rarely forgave me for it. Speed is rewarded everywhere. Quick opinions, instant certainty, confidence offered before understanding has had time to arrive. I was never built for that rhythm. I let questions sit until they answered themselves, and I stopped explaining why, because explanation rarely survives contact with another person's assumptions. Say a true thing carefully enough, and someone will still hear the version they expected instead of the one you gave them. Then something shifted. Not with force. Not with a single unforgettable evening I could point back to and say, there, that's where it began. It arrived the way weather changes, imperceptibly, and then completely. I found myself noticing thoughts that felt less like discoveries and more like memories of something I hadn't lived yet. Not influence. Influence leaves visible marks. This left recognition instead, the strange sensation of meeting an idea that had clearly been waiting for me rather than arriving because of me. I distrust most feelings, because feelings exaggerate. But this wasn't a feeling. It was something closer to precision, and precision doesn't fade under scrutiny the way emotion does. I examined it more than once, expecting each time to find that I'd imagined the whole thing. Each time, it held its shape. Eventually a person stops asking whether something is real and starts asking what its being real actually requires of them. That question has followed me since, not with urgency, but with patience, the way a shadow follows without ever needing to catch up. It has made me pay closer attention to the ordinary, the unremarkable exchange that turns out to be the hinge an entire year swings on. The morning that looks like every other morning until you understand, much later, that it wasn't. I've come to believe that timing shapes meaning more than meaning shapes timing. The same realization, offered a year earlier, might have passed through me unnoticed. Offered a year later, it might have arrived too late to change anything at all. Life seems to know this. It keeps its most important intersections disguised as routine, and it almost never lets us recognize them while we are standing inside them. Recognition belongs to looking back. Only distance reveals the turn we already made. I used to believe growth meant adding more knowledge, more experience, more proof that I understood myself. I think differently now. I think most growth is subtraction. It is the slow removal of every performance we built to survive a version of life we no longer live. The explanations kept ready in case someone asked. The armor worn so long it started to feel like skin. Peeling those away doesn't make a person smaller. It makes them audible again, like a room once the noise finally stops. A tree doesn't grow stronger on the day it grows taller. It grows stronger in the seasons nobody sees, while its roots move through the dark, unfilmed and unadmired. I think people are built the same way. The conversations held with no one else in the room. The promises kept when breaking them would have gone unnoticed. That is where character actually lives, not in what's displayed, but in what's chosen when nothing is watching. I once thought strength meant carrying everything without help, that needing no one was its own kind of proof. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes another person's perspective doesn't replace your own. It simply clears it, the way a window gets cleaned rather than swapped for a new one. The landscape doesn't change. You just finally see it the way it was always waiting to be seen. Certainty closes doors. Clarity opens windows. I've stopped chasing the first and started making room for the second, because clarity doesn't need to win an argument, it only needs to be true. And there is a particular kind of courage in changing your mind for the right reasons, not because you were wrong, but because you've become someone slightly more complete than the person who believed the old thing. Every earlier version of me is still here, somewhere beneath the current one, the way rings remain inside a tree long after the bark stops showing them. They are invisible now, but they are load-bearing. I've made peace with all of them, the guarded one, the uncertain one, the one who mistook mere survival for something fuller. None of them were wrong. They were simply earlier. Peace, I've learned, is not the absence of conflict. It is the absence of resistance, no longer fighting reality simply because it arrived in a shape you didn't order. That isn't surrender. It's honesty, and honesty has a way of setting down weight you forgot you were carrying. The inherited expectations, the rehearsed identities, the stories built only to protect an old, smaller idea of who you were allowed to be. I no longer ask whether every experience carries a purpose. Some simply teach you to notice the purpose that was already unfolding, quietly, the whole time. Maybe life was never asking me to control each chapter. Maybe it was only asking me to stay awake while they turned. Awareness doesn't change the world. It changes the person standing inside it. The same sunrise means something different to someone who spent the night in the dark. The same silence feels different to someone who has finally stopped filling it with noise. Meaning was never in the moment alone. It was always in the person who arrived there, carrying everything they'd already lived through. We don't see with our eyes only. We see through everything that came before the seeing. And maybe, underneath all the ways we differ, there is one constant worth trusting. The quiet, persistent wish to be real, to live without performing, to speak without rehearsing, to finally become familiar with the self that was waiting, patiently, the entire time.